Yo, welcome to episode 82 of the Titanforge podcast.
Dude, you in that starting soon screen is so good.
What?
It's just crossed out over and over again. It's just like very late CEST. And it's just like
A different color, 3:30.
3:30 p.m.
Well, here's one thing that I realized. Even though the time changed PST from 3 to 3:30, it didn't change in European time because it's still very late. So I should just put like afternoon-ish PST and then I wouldn't have to have changed it.
But it's not even CEST, it's CET right now.
That's why it's so late. Yeah, it's because you have to wait a whole half year for CEST to be back on.
Okay.
Um, so this week we have quite a bit to catch up on because we did miss last week due to a combination of IRL events going on. We're all back and everybody's okay though for this week, I hope.
True.
And
I'm fine, thanks. Don't say it like that.
Well, because Trell, you were down in Texas where things got weird for a bit, huh?
Oh, it got so rowdy down here in yonder Texas.
Did you lose
I
power?
got iced in. I didn't lose power, but I lost water for over a week. I was cosplaying as Asmongold without showering.
I heard you had to steal pool water to flush your toilet.
Yes, I had to get some buckets, go out to the well, aka the community swimming pool, get some water, and come back up to use for certain things.
Wow, that is horrifying.
The American infrastructure, bro.
Yeah, it's just Texas. It's weird.
This week we are going to mainly discuss patch 9.0.5 and patch 9.1 because those are the two big things on the horizon now for WoW. 9.0.5 we know to be in about the next month at some point, and 9.1 we don't actually know when that's going to happen. But I think I've noticed a lot of people in my stream chat in particular kind of conflating and confusing the two. So I feel like it'll be useful for everybody to kind of know what's happening in each of them and when they might be. My guess for 9.1 is, I don't know, June sometime.
That's what I would think.
Seems like it.
July.
I think anything later than June would be really, really weird. I think that because June by itself is already a pretty long first patch. Normally the first patch is like 5 months or so. So June by itself would already be pretty long. If it's like July, I would be fairly surprised.
Yeah, because 9.1 is the big content patch. That one has the new raid, the new zone, all the new exciting Maw content. It's been confirmed, by the way, that Sigia is basically not relevant at all. You can spend it all now, fire it off. Don't need to do any of the Sigia hoarding stuff that I've talked about in previous episodes, which, thank goodness, is really nice that that's not incentivized.
Was I the only person who got the absolute shit baited out of me whenever the press release got leaked and they were like, join forces with other covenants to fight the Maw? And I'm like, are they letting us swap freely between covenants now? No, fuck you.
No.
You're not swapping, but you're joining forces with the other covenants. I'm like, okay, very cool.
Well, they've like said that they're going to look into making sure that it doesn't feel too bad to swap. So we'll see what that means. But yeah,
Let's say right now, dungeon meta feels pretty bad to swap, and it feels pretty bad to not have the right covenant in your group.
Yeah, and there's some news on the horizon about that as well. So 9.1, the major patch with most stuff happening in it. 9.05, though, is the sooner patch, and that one has some more, like, systems updates. This is the one that it's going to have, like, legendaries, conduits, covenants, and some other changes, including the introduction of Valor Points. Valor Points we've talked about, I think, last show, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah.
They hadn't fleshed out the system fully. Still haven't fleshed out the system fully. It's been implemented on the PTR, but they said that it's supposed to be, like, majorly changed within the next week. So there's still a lot of stuff with Valor points.
The like how many Valor you get per dungeon, how much you get for doing a calling, all that seems to still be in flux.
I would suspect that the item level is also probably in flux.
Maybe.
If I had to.
Yeah, there would be. I'd love to see a way to get up to 226 there, but I'm not holding out hope actually on that one.
Well, we'll talk about this. Oh God,
we can talk about
at some point. So under the BlizzCon section, they actually talk about PvP gearing and how they may actually revert it back to WoD style of gearing, and for arena specifically. And for those who don't know, basically the arena gear would get bumped up 60 item levels whenever you were in arena. Whether it didn't matter if it was the conquest stuff or whether it was like the honor stuff, it would get bumped up like a bunch of item levels whenever you were inside of like BGs, RBGs, whenever you're engaged, I think in open world content and in arena. But that kept item level deflated for PvPers where they didn't just mass farm to 226 item level gear the first week of the expansion or whatever.
Yeah, this system had some upsides. It had the upsides of like your PvP gear was good in PvP, but it didn't make you OP in PvE, right? And they could implement something like this for Mythic Plus as well, right? Where there are items that are 220 that scale up to 226, right? Or even 233 for weapons, only in the M Plus dungeons. The downside I've always felt with this system was that like you ended up maintaining like multiple different gear sets, not because the items were like better or worse, just because like they were different item levels and different content. I always thought that was a little awkward, but honestly, I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to re-implementing this because I feel like that downside might just be much smaller than the downsides of the other ways you could do it.
Dude, I used to complain about that shit too. Yeah. You know what? I just don't care anymore. Get me the fuck out of what we have right now. Just take me back. Honestly, they were right. I was wrong.
For the record, they're considering it, right? That like when the devs say they're considering something, that doesn't really mean that much. It's a little bit different if they like denied they were ever considering something and then they say, all right, now we're considering it. Like that indicates a trend, but I'm not sure they would have ever said they weren't considering something like this, right? So I don't know if this actually implies there's any movement on this in this direction, but I think it would be a good place to go. I think it would be a nice, like it'd be a little awkward, but I think it would solve a lot of those rough problems around the margins of item level.
I think it also allows them to do like cooler stuff with. So if they do re-implement tier sets and shit, I think it allows them to do pretty cool stuff with like tier sets and potentially even like new trinkets. I don't know if they're going to actually change up the trinkets or if you're going to have like battle masters and badge and shit for the rest of the expansion, but like they could potentially do some weird stuff with trinkets as well, as long as they're being scaled up.
Yeah. So you mean like cool trinkets that are only good in one form of the game because they're only high item level in that form of the game?
Exactly.
It's like they don't have to worry about making raid trinkets that are OP in PvP because the PvP trinkets are better or something.
Yeah, that's cool. That potentially, or they could honestly also just disable PvE trinkets in PvP. That I don't think anybody would like really complain that much.
I think that would not be a bad idea either. Or like I don't know, nerf them. Just have them all come out at 30% effectiveness in PvP.
That's fine too.
So that's
one of those solutions would help, I think.
Yeah, I think.
But I mostly just agree with all those points, though.
I think it's I'm encouraged by the amount of movement there has been though on gearing since the start of this expansion. There was the increase in raid gear as well that we just saw, up to like 4 pieces per boss from 3.
Yeah, that was good.
That's good. Actually, it feels remarkably better at 4 than 3. Although I think part of that is also just people are able to trade almost everything now, so almost every item is getting traded around if people need it. So maybe that's like not actually that the system changing. So let's talk about some of the system changes that are in 905 though that aren't the Valor Point stuff. First one we have is actually a Covenant dungeon thing, which we kind of alluded to a little bit at the intro here. The Venthyr dungeons. So Tattles, why don't you walk us through what's happening with the Venthyr dungeons in 905?
So basically the Stoneborns are getting nerfed, and like partially changed. So overall they're going to do less damage is what it seems like. But in conjunction with that, they're doing all of their damage over 45 seconds instead of 30 seconds. This is slightly positive for the damage reduction effect that you get. Whenever you do MC a Stoneborn, you do get 10% DR. That's going to be moved from 30 to 45 seconds as well. But the damage that the Stoneborn does is a little bit less as a whole, but it's spread over 45 seconds as well. And on top of that, then they went into Sanguine Depths. They decided that Sanguine Depths' buff sucked. I don't know who decided that, but they decided that Sanguine Depths' buff sucked, and so they buffed the shit out of it. They buffed this thing to they changed the duration from 60 seconds to 75 on the buff, and they changed the duration on the lantern from 45 seconds to 60. So to put that in context, how absurd that is, like basically you can refresh the lantern, and that's like one of the biggest tactics for a couple of the wings is just like you can refresh the lantern buff, and that shit can be OP, especially if you were going to route around these lanterns now. And it's like, and it says in the article, you can get up to 50% damage gain with that. It was not a bad buff before. I'm really surprised that they've elected to buff the Sanguine Depths Sinfall boon thing.
Yeah, it was already super strong. 50% damage is is by far the biggest buff I think you can get in any of the Covenant.
Yeah, to
dungeon
me,
buffs.
It seems like there's just a disconnect. This is kind of that disconnect between like the weekly 15 groups and the like coordinated high key groups. Because I think in a weekly 15 setting, the lanterns were like pretty awkward. It was pretty easy to activate them and maybe have them turn off before they finish going. There are some mobs that like don't filter into them, and if you're just pulling like one pack at a time, like maybe you're just only getting like a 15% buff, and maybe this buff felt less impactful than stuff like the gargoyle or the spear or whatever or any of the AoE stun effects that all feel so massively impactful, right? And so they want to like buff the numbers on these, but it was already, yeah, as you were saying, really, really big if you were a group that actually used it well.
It's just awkward too, because like I think the reason that people don't notice how silly it is because they will fight the lantern and then they immediately fight a mob that's making them do, I don't know, 30% reduced damage or whatever, and so they don't recognize. Yeah, they don't recognize just how silly that buff really is whenever they have to fight the oppressor immediately after it. So that's why I was saying, like, I think if you start routing around this, and notably in like the Tarvald area where there are 2 lanterns, but most of them are used pretty shittily, I will say. Nobody really uses the lanterns in the Tarvald area that great. If you start routing around them, I think that like those things could be. I think that Sanguine Depths having a Venthyr wasn't mandatory before. I think it's probably mandatory now with whenever they buff that up like that.
The ability to extend the buff, right, and get the extension from like 7 stacks up to 8 on the next lantern is a huge benefit, right?
Well, it also resets the duration.
Right, exactly. So like, you get like double benefit from the first lantern if you can extend it on the second one, and that the window to be able to do that has gone up from the 60 seconds after you get the buff to 75, and the lanterns are active for longer, so it really hugely expands the window to get that double extension thing. Yeah.
The problem is like Venthyrs are so rare in Pugs as it is, and second, it's kind of hard to do this Covenant buff because it's not just one person clicking a button; it's like the whole group effort. One person activates the lantern for 45 seconds. The rest of the group has to keep mobs in it. Like the whole Tarvald area, the mobs drop puddles constantly, so it's hard to keep the mobs in it. So it's a whole like community get together to get the buff kind of thing rather than one person. But it is cool to see buffs. Hopefully, this encourages Pugs to do it more.
What do you think about people being asked and asking others to swap covenants for dungeons specifically?
I mean,
I don't think it should be a thing. I think we should be able to swap covenants, but in our reality, it sucks.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're in like a push group or something, if you're trying to push like a high key, the same group for all week, like, yeah, you guys should coordinate and make a comp that has the best chance of succeeding in the dungeons, right?
At what point would you swap for your group?
Like if I was pushing M+ for like with any,
if you're on your Kyrian Vengeance Demon Hunter right now and you needed to be playing Venthyr with Draven, like at what point would you start swapping?
If M+ was like my priority, I would do it just if I was pushing keys, right? Regardless of really where our group is at, just because that gives us the best chance of success. However, there's a little bit of a drawback where like pushing that button potentially nerfs you in raid next tier, right? Mm-hmm. Having pulled the trigger on that, so that's something that you got to juggle, right? Because it sort of becomes a question of like, okay, what's the relative priority you're placing on M+ versus raid? On the other hand, Venthyr might be good in raid next tier as well. So
I'm trying to think at what point I would go Venthyr on my Brewmaster, because like I play Windwalker and raid, so Venthyr, Windwalker, and raid would be hard inting.
It's not good on Brew either, right?
No.
It's like all 3 of the other covenants are much better, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I think
you could go Necrolord Brew. That's like a thing.
Bone Dust Brew is fine.
But like if I had to go Venthyr, I don't know. I'd have to wait until like really late in the tier to ensure that my guild doesn't have more wipes or something, because I'm not Kyrian.
I think Trance went Venthyr. Or not Venthyr, Necrolord.
Yeah, I went Necro to try it out.
I think that's fine. Like I think Necro Brew is just totally playable. And so same with Fae, actually. I think both of those are very defensible. Yeah. But Venthyr Monk in general is just kind of scuffed. But that segues rather nicely into our next bit, which is they're actually doing quite a bit of work to take a look at those scuffed Covenant spec or Covenant class combos and bring them up to where the others are. So next expansion, next patch, 905, we have a bunch of changes to the different Covenant effects, including also legendaries. So there's some legendary buffs and nerfs, and a bunch of stuff for Covenants. I think the biggest thing that'll affect every class is the Necrolord buff. Fleshcraft is giving you a 20% DR now while you're channeling it. You channel the same size shield over a shorter time, and it's 40% of your max HP. This is quite a substantial buff too. I think the weakest, pretty universally the weakest of the signature Covenant abilities, right? Because in a lot of settings you could never really channel, and a lot of roles couldn't effectively channel this. For value.
It's also by far the least represented Covenant. Like it's, I don't even think it's close. I think that Necrolord has like by far the least representation in a pretty meaningful way too. I don't like. Obviously, we are pretty skewed. How many Necrolords do you guys have in your raid? Is it just the DKs and the Resto Shamans? We actually have less Vinthirs in raid.
Yeah, I think so.
But I think Vinthir as a whole has higher representation, which is strange.
Yeah, I think some of our Resto Shamans swapped maybe to Venthir for keys, although I think some of them might have swapped back now. I don't know. I don't keep track of our raid Covenants. After Sire went down, everybody's just free to do whatever they want with their Covenants.
Yeah.
It's basically our theory.
We had 2 Vinthirs, so our Arms Warrior and our Disc Priest were both Vinthir. And then we had I guess we had triple DK, so we had 5 Necrolords.
Yeah, I think it was just the DKs and the Resto Shaman that played it in our raid also.
We just had so many Night Fae, man.
Yeah, Fae everywhere. And Soul Shape got a lot of value this tier. Like it's really good on both Sire and Stone Legion. There's a lot of good moments for Soul Shape, so that you saw that ability used all the time. I think Door of Shadow's a lot less common, but that also has some pretty good value in a couple of those fights. Depending on which spec you're playing, especially if you're playing one of those immobile specs. It's got a lot of good stuff it does. And of course, Carrion File, that's another, that thing's just insane.
Yeah. Also, last time we were on the show, we talked about Fleshcraft being a 30% DR. It was bumped down to 20%, like Darno said. And also, we were talking about how it couldn't be dodged, or tanks could not dodge or parry, but you actually can. They changed that at some point. So Fleshcraft is a very, very strong defensive for tanks, like especially for incoming magic damage bursts, but I have a feeling they're going to bump it down to like 10% DR, 15 maybe.
Yeah, so it's a question of opportunity cost, right? So you're spending 3 seconds, and you're going to heal yourself for 40% of your max HP and give yourself a 20% DR for those 3 seconds. To what extent is that better than the other things you could be doing? My suspicion is it's actually probably pretty competitive, or even slightly better if you are actively getting autoed, and if you're tanking, like it's probably fine to actually push this button. As a small defensive, but it's not as big as it seems because of the opportunity cost, right? That you could be pressing your your keg smashes or whatever and getting your bruise back.
Yeah.
But if you're ever sitting with like a bleed or a poison on you and you're not next to the boss and you press this button, that's going to be huge value. And there are a lot of beefy tank bleeds in a lot of fights.
I think it's practically useful for stuff like even the shards of Halkias with obliterators in Halls of Atonement. Like,
yeah,
most of the damage to the tank there is from the Wicked Bolts from the obliterators, and like you don't always have kick coverage for those bolts, and so like, yeah, that's a flat 20% DR versus magic damage. And it's a shield on top of it. It's really not that bad.
Certainly, I think it's defensible that it would it's a button you would probably press, but I think that it's best use where it's like not just like maybe slightly better than what else the other buttons you could be pressing in the same globals, but a lot better is if you do have like a dot and you're out of melee range, and then it's like insane value.
Yeah, I would tend to agree.
I think in those situations as a tank, I kind of think of my defensives as like a utility belt. I've got like 4 things on my belt I can use, and then they run out. But like adding one more thing to the utility belt is always really nice. Like say you find the 5 Ether Diver packs in Spires, and you can like AoE stun them and then Fleshcraft and take all of their hits at the same time, and just DR all of them. Like stuff like that's really, really good.
Yeah, I think that the DR, I imagine, is going to trick people into not channeling this thing before combat, which is kind of the meta with it right now, right? Is you press it out of combat if you ever get a couple seconds. My suspicion is that is still going to be really good, and you should probably still do that more often than like my guess is that the fact that it's attached to a DR is people are going to feel like they need to have this DR be effective before they press this button now. And my guess is that
That's a
it's
good
still
point.
like using this thing out of combat is still going to be extremely good because obviously there the opportunity cost is 0, right?
Well, as DPS, that is the case. I think as tanks, like you want to in raid you definitely cast out of combat. In like you don't want to stand there for 4 seconds channeling it as part of the
Well, it's because you don't, because you just want to start the pull. But like if you have an
Yeah.
opportunity, right? If your healer's casting res or drinking or whatever, I think it'll often be a good button to press. It'll depend a little bit on your tank spec because some tank specs are just so fine on pull, right? Like if you're a warrior and you could just like avatar shield block and charge in, like okay,
big vibe, yeah.
Don't need anything. But if you're like a death knight or a bear, you know,
Even a Vengeance Demon Hunter, man.
Having an absorb shield on pull is big. That's big value for those specs that are so squishy for the first couple globals, right? Like while you're marrow rending, you're dying.
I feel like Vengeance Demon Hunter is also really, really squishy on pull. Like spikes doesn't feel like enough on pull a lot of the time.
Well, to be honest, every tank's really squishy on pull.
It's probably pretty true.
Now.
I mean, I always just like cannon off either Fiery Brand or Fell Devastation as like a third global on most pulls.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I agree with you that if you don't do that, you start feeling in pain.
I get it, Demon Hunter pain.
Yes.
Well, I mean, you'll like leap into a pack with spikes up, and you'll just fucking die sometimes. It's like, okay, unfortunate.
Okay, let's take a look at some of the broader sweeping changes here in 9.0.5. See if there's anything in particular that we want to call out and discuss. So there's some various buffs to certain specs and talent choices. We got Havoc Demon Hunter, Unbound Chaos getting buffed. There's other changes. It's not perfectly organized. Like there's some Havoc Legendary changes to talk about as well when we get there, I think. Resto Druid's getting a couple of small buffs. Beast Mastery Hunter, Spitting Cobra buff. Mistweaver Monk.
That's a huge buff to Beastmaster. Like just the number, I mean.
Yeah, 260% is a big number. I think Spitting Cobra was a pretty bad talent though.
It is a god awful talent. I don't know if it would still be used. That talent was fucking beans though. That thing is so bad.
Our Defender's Heal now has a visual effect. Poggers. Spirit Shell nerf. Also poggers. Although probably
it still exists.
Probably still gonna be pretty good here. Couple of other, changes here. Ellie Shaman, quite a bit going on here. We've got changes to basically all of the damage of Ellie and Resto damage, except for Lava Burst is getting nerfed and everything else is going up, basically.
How the fuck are they buffing Ellie?
Well, it's pretty underrepresented.
It's so good right now, though.
It does a lot of damage already, that's true. Although, Lava Burst, I mean, all of these changes, but then Lava Burst reduced by 10%. This actually does offset quite a bit of this, because Lava Burst is a lot of damn. Like, Lava Beam, that's the Ascendant's Chain Lightning thing, right?
I tend to agree, but like,
not a real
what
change.
The fuck? That class didn't need a buff.
Certainly the, Earth Shock damage going up is going to be fun in PvP, man. The spec just one-shots you, yeah.
Dude,
some
I love
enhancing buffs as well.
Hug.
Then we get to the Covenant. So this is where we start getting to the real stuff. So Death Knight, we've got Kyrian buff, Kyrian Death Knight buff, pretty substantial. 15% damage buff on Shackle, and the DR has gone up to 8 from 5%. I was already playing Kyrian on Blood for just potentially for raid. It feels pretty bad. It's an ability that just is not a particularly satisfying one to use. But it's starting, like, if with this buff, it starts to feel like it might be more worthwhile. And they've also buffed Blue D&D back up. Do you guys remember early in beta where Blue D&D was like absurdly OP and every Death Knight was playing it, and then they just nerfed it like 7 times?
It was also like 100% of Blood DK's threat. Yeah.
Yeah, it's doubled the speed at which it stacks up, although not the ceiling. So not that big of a change if you're playing optimally. Just a little bit less punishing if you screw it up.
I really like Blue D&D, so I'm hoping it's coming back. I think it promotes good gameplay for DKs, trying to stay within your D&D as long as you can instead of kiting, because you get a lot of DR and power from just being there.
Yes, Wild Spirits. Yes, except for DKs.
DH, we have a 10% damage nerf for Vengeance Elysian Decree, 10% damage nerf for Vengeance Hunt, and 10% damage nerf for Sinful Brand Vengeance. So everything unchanged for Havoc, but some slight damage nerfs to whatever your Covenant is for Vengeance for your main button. And also, Fodder to the Flame has been redesigned. It's now the Demon Proc. It's something like 1.5 RPPM, and it makes a demon that instantly dies when you throw glaive it, explodes, and heals you for 30% of your max HP. I imagine this is not going to be a particularly good thing.
Did Vengeance need damage nerfs? They're not even. Are they the top DPS tank?
They're not
tell
like
me that Bear does more.
They're not the top if you're building for damage, but if you're building for survivability, they're the top.
Okay, that makes sense.
If Dorky was talking about raid, then there is if you owl weave and raid, then you can do more damage to Vengeance, but like by default, like the normal tank builds that 99% of players would be able to do, because you can't really just moon weave and raid as the average player. You gotta have a lot of support doing
Brewmaster also does a large amount of single target, and like Paladin, depending on their build, can do a large amount of damage as well. But
Brew does a fuck ton of single target. That's true.
But Vengeance does huge damage while in their turtliest build is the thing.
Yes.
Whereas other builds, like if you're playing like Blood Decay and you're like, I picked all the defensive talents and I do 2 DPS.
I'm just surprised that they're nerfing Sinful Brand. All right, Elysian Decree. I get it, dude. Elysian Decree is dumb as hell. Sinful Brand nerf is kind of weird to me. Like a Sinful Brand.
Yeah, I understand that one.
Yeah, I don't have too much of a problem with these nerfs, but I also wouldn't have a problem with them not being here. I do think Elysian Decree a very reasonable place for the nerfs to go.
That needed to be nerfed. I don't think anybody's arguing that ability just being one button doing whatever stupid amount of damage.
They've also nerfed some Vengeance conduits. Repeat Decree and Fell Defender have gotten nerfed. Not the end of the world. Vengeance. Everybody. So since I play Vengeance, everybody asks if the spec is dead. These are not spec killing nerfs. Do not be afraid.
Oh no, definitely not.
This is like 1/8 of the way towards the spec being in line or something.
Especially in raid, dude. In raid, they have a class buff.
Yeah,
you're basically picking your tanks between Vengeance Brewmaster and Vengeance Brewmaster and Prot Warrior, and you're just taking the highest DPS out of the those three, whether it be like Windwalker, Havoc, or Arms Fury, and you're taking that and then putting the tanks on the other two. So yeah,
that's what the high end, good. The higher end guilds are doing. I do think for the lower end guilds, that's a little bit less of the way that they do it, but it is really powerful.
For the rest of the guilds out there, they just take 2 tanks as long as they can find 2 tanks.
Yeah, definitely. That's true. Druid, we have buff to Necrolord, which already was a pretty good Covenant ability for Bear. Also, a sleeper one, I think. But buff for the all Covenants. Endless Thirst buff as well, the Venthyr Conduit. Hunter, we've got Necrolord buff. We got Venthyr buff. Mage, we've got Kyrian buff. We got Necrolord buff, which is kind of exciting for perhaps Arcane under the when the stars align, and there's some very convoluted circumstances you could come up with where Arcane Necrolord is pretty powerful. So,
where Arcane is powerful, yes.
Arcane Necrolord is if you have 3 targets, a 3-target burst window every 3 minutes or every 4 minutes. Necrolord is just
that are
insane.
Stacked.
Yeah, that are stacked because they do have to be close enough for your Arcane Blast to cleave. And it's a 15% instead of 10%. It's it's a buff. And Mirrors of Torment, it now gives you stack of clear casting when a mirror is consumed, which is good because it used to just give 2 mana. And Fire Blast is getting more CDR from Venthyr. So my suspicion is this doesn't change too much for Mage. My suspicion is Fae is going to continue to be the best by far for all real-world purposes except for Frost. Monk, Venthyr buffs for the Tiger and Ox adepts, not the Crane ones, of course.
Didn't want to make those sweepers too strong.
Well, yeah, so the way it works is you get adepts from all 3 schools, but you get more from your spec school.
Okay.
So yeah, there's a bigger buff for Windwalker and Brewmaster than for Mist.
That's so bad.
Paladin. Oh, you get some. Can I interest you in some holy power in these trying times for pressing your Vanquisher's Hammer button? Also, Kyrian, slight change in the ring clarity functionality. Fey Guardians. Okay, this one was one that caught me by a little bit by surprise. Fey Guardians for Priest. This is the Night Fey ability. 15% damage reduction now, up from 10 on Guardian Fairy. 150% faster recovery rate to a major cooldown was 100% on Benevolent Fairy. And Wrathful Fairy will now automatically be sent to the closest enemy, so you don't have to do a harmful button.
Dude, that shit's already OP for Priest. Like, what?
As usual, some changes are like, did they just throw darts at a board with a blindfold on?
Well, my suspicion is that like very few people outside of the like Turbo Min Maxi players were playing Fey Priest. Like even the Turbo Min Maxi players are mostly playing like Venthyr, right?
Yeah.
But under the right circumstances, Fey Priest is really strong, and it has been upticking in playability in play rates recently. This is a huge change. Like, I mean, the amount of benefit that they can grant to a Fire Mage or whatever, 150% faster cooldown recovery, up from 100 that's huge. For
dude, public in chat, the people's theory crafter deciding who in fact is worthy of cooldown recovery and power infusion, talking about Blizzard is literally trolling me now.
I mean, the sick part is like, I think you could turn Moonkin into a 2-minute spec now, right? Like,
I think you probably can.
Okay, so consider the following composition, right? You have a Fey Priest that's like giving Moonkin CDR. You probably don't even need to PI them. You can just PI like a Hunter or
you don't need it. You don't need
PI. And then you have the Warriors, who, spoiler alert, Warriors are getting that banner ability, which I think we actually did talk about when it was first spoiled, but is granting 400 mastery every 2 minutes. So Moonkin could just have CA and 400 mastery every 2 minutes if you bring a Fey Priest and a Warrior.
You know what's just absurd to me? So many Shadow Priests swapped to Night Fae for Denathries too, because of the cooldown timings that they were already getting from their Guardians, and then it's just like that's why you're just like, oh, are they throwing darts at a dartboard? Night Fae Priest was already good. It's just good under niche circumstances.
Well, that's
now
the thing,
it's
right?
Like, oh, you're just gonna give that shit away now. You're not allowed to keep that anymore, man.
To me, it's the exact same thing as the Sanguine Depths Venthyr change, where it's like, okay, yes, when the game is being played, like, by people planning ahead and thinking about how they're going to use all their buttons and like developing a coordinated plan for how to attack stuff, this stuff was already really powerful, and it's now just being brought to really more power. But that's because it's the players that aren't really doing that like just didn't see Night Fae as being all that attractive, because Night Fae being used at like 50% optimal play is pretty bad, right? It's pretty bad if you're just kind of casting it at random. And so in order for it to be good in that case, you just need to buff the numbers on it, right? And similarly, like the Venthyr ones, if it's just like, oh, hey, here's the Lantern, I click this, oh, I get a 10% damage buff, cool, right? That's pretty bad as well. Used in that kind of naive way, right? In the way where you're not really planning ahead, which is different from the more obvious abilities, right? If your ability is just one button, 2-minute cooldown, does a bunch of damage, right? That's a lot easier and a lot more. It scales as the same between the people that are coordinated and the people that aren't.
We kind of joked about this. Was it last show? Or was it 2 shows ago? When we were talking about PI. Holy shit! They have to stop. Blizzard literally has got to stop with this like group utility garbage.
Everybody just supports each other.
Raid buffs are bad. This shit is the worst, because it's not that it's unfun, but I feel like I noticed that it creates major animosity between players, because the people who have the ability believe that they're entitled and deserve it, and the people who want the ability for some reason also believe that they're entitled and deserve it. You're like, what the fuck is happening?
I mean, people have good arguments on all sides, right? The Shadow Priests are like, man, why can't I, use this button to make my gameplay more fun, like I do out in the open world, right? Like, why can't I have this fun button that gives me a bunch of haste, right? And then your Hunter's like, oh, no, dude, look, I've crunched the numbers on this. I'm the right person to target with this. It gives me the most damage. And then your DK's like, no, dude, look, I'm armying, so I should get the PI on my army. And then your Priest's like, no, dude, I just used it 1 minute ago on the Hunter because it's right to use it on them or whatever. And just all 3 people, nobody in this situation is happy. Everybody's just angry. And like one of the 3 people at any given time is just like, just territorially defending their PI, and they're like, get away from my PI.
I mean, I've never cared because I'm not a spec that cares about it. But like, dude, if I was a spec that cared about it, it'd be fucking annoying. Like having other people get it too. It's like,
and you don't have to be somebody that like there's this archetype of players that are just like, oh yeah, let's nobody else deal damage to the ads, right? Let me parse, right? And you don't have to be one of those players for it to not be fun when other people that are getting PIs, they're getting like 2 PIs, are doing twice as much damage as you, right? You don't have to be that parse, sensitive to not have as much fun when
Exactly.
the PIs are like hugely affecting the damage meters.
Well, I mean, on top of that, I tweeted this out as a joke. I was like, Innervate should give 25% haste. It's whenever you hear that, you're just like, what the fuck? That's some bullshit. But then whenever you really think about it, that's the exact same shit that Power Infusion does. It's just like that is such an absurdly stupid idea that I tweeted out, and then you just think about it, you're like, wait, they already have that in the game. You're like,
yeah. It's just bad to see changes like this that are increasing the amount of support spells out there, or the power of the support spells, where people just want to use their own stuff, man.
I'm gonna Heart of the Wild myself with fucking Resto Affinity and Innervate myself, then so I can get my own haste. I don't know. I don't like healers.
All right, to close out the changes here, we've got some random Venthyr Rogue buffs. Rogue, I think, was the class that had I was most impressed with how closely tuned all the covenants were for Rogue, but also they're the least exciting covenant abilities of any class. So
I was the most
true.
impressed with how close all 3 specs of Rogue are tuned together as well. Right there at the bottom. Holy shit.
Poor rogues.
Shaman, we got Carrion buffs. We got Fae buffs. Wait, that one's reasonable. We've got Primordial Wave buffs, but it's actually just Primordial Waves for Enhancement buff. Which initially it was all of them.
Okay. I was like, wait a minute.
And then Chain Harvest also buffed. Damage and healing on Chain Harvest buffed. Ellie and Resto, yeah. But I mean, Resto was using it for being the Venthyr in the group, right?
Yeah. So I think a general synthesis of all these changes are very minor changes to try to get the low outliers in line. There are very few buffs. They even took the Warlock nerfs off the board too. They went back on the
right.
There are very few nerfs. They took the Warlock nerfs off the board. They're basically just trying to buff up the stuff that is like really, really bad. And Night Fae Priest, which
my suspicion is that this isn't going to change too many specs' best Covenant options. It will bring a few of them closer, and my suspicion is for a couple of those there might be some marginal changes in which one the best is, and it might feel bad for those specs. There are a couple that I do think, like the maybe Warrior Necrolord, maybe Fae Priest. Those are the ones where like maybe this will shift metas. But I think for the most part, this is a set of changes that will not shift the meta so much as make it like less punishing or more interesting to be one of the less main covenants.
Oh, this is interesting. What do you think about there being no Naya or Pelagos nerfs yet?
I'm surprised a little bit by that. Yeah, I mean, I think the difference, when you look at the difference between like Pelagos and like Brawn, right? Or Mika Nikos, I guess.
Oh, Brawn. Don't get me started on Brawn, man.
Mechanicus or whatever.
Yeah. Brawn just shows up and he like hits for 0.2 damage and then just runs away. My work here is done, but you didn't do anything.
POV, you're about to finish a pack on Sanguine Week. Your rogue summons Brawn and knocks the main mob back into the Sanguine randomly.
Your rogue is now a Night Fae.
Dude, the best part of the Mika Nikos tree has that fall damage DR, which is functional on that's functional on Sire. You take fall damage like 4 times in that fight.
Fuck, I'm dying. Yeah, I don't know, man. I'm surprised that they didn't hit any of the Soulbind traits either. Mostly Pelagos and Naya. Those are the two kind of outlier ones.
I think that's a case of like, I don't know, if you nerf Pelagos, if you nerf Naya, there are maybe a lot of specs that would potentially switch Covenant to based off of that, right? Like that's something that might affect all 36 specs, right?
That is true.
In different ways, right? Because like, there are a lot of specs where it might be fine, but there are some specs that aren't really that concerned with which Covenant they pick, and it's the Soulbind, like the power of the Naya tree is a pretty big draw for some specs. I don't know. It's a tough spot that Blizzard has backed themselves into here, but I think that this is a good way to navigate, given the restrictions they place for themselves. I think that these sort of nerfs and buffs are likely to be they're likely to be pretty safe. I think that that they do got to be careful to avoid shaking up the pot too much. And I think they've managed to touch most of the stuff that's an outlier on the bottom end without necessarily like hugely invalidating people's previous choices. So I think that this is pretty good. My question is like how much they're going to be able to keep this up whenever they inevitably introduce like new game systems or people's gear changes or there's tier sets or new trinkets or anything like that. My suspicion is that like once we start getting to the actual like 0.1, 0.2 patches, it's going to be a lot harder to maintain.
Oh, speaking of Braun, one of my guildies reminded me. Braun has a trade that consumes your file automatically.
Yeah.
And like any
Does
kind
it
of
really?
hard content, you drop below that health threshold quite a bit. So like, you just don't have a file when you want it.
What's the
You
health
don't have to take
threshold?
that one, right? It's one of the side picks, I think, but I think it's maybe the good side for conduits.
Yeah, I want to say it's 35% health totals.
Yeah, I mean
That's so cringe.
That's usually the threshold they pick, by the way. They usually do stuff at like 35% health for auto consume or like a proc.
dude,
if it's a heal or something.
I made this poll of remember when Mechanome when they said what Mechanome did midway through BFA. I made this Twitter poll that was like, okay, you have an ability that heals you when you drop below a certain health threshold. What health threshold would you set this at? And I put like 10%, 20%, 35, and 50. And it was actually evenly split between 35 and 20 what people thought was the most powerful of those.
Dude, I would use it at 50 every single time. Like straight up, I want it to get used on CD.
Yes.
My thought process, something like that.
So the higher the health threshold, the more often it's going to get used, but the less likely it'll be available for some potentially lethal sequence of blows on you. But the lower you set the health threshold, the more likely you are to get one shot through it, right? If you set it at like 10%, there's a good chance you just go from 11 to dead without it proccing. So
my general thought process in this game is I'm not going to get one shot by anything that I shouldn't have, at least through something like that.
So you just want the HPS?
I would exactly. I prefer the HPS. I like the well-honed instincts proccing at 40% because it's bullshit, and 40% happens basically on CD, and you're able to just heal yourself to full.
I do think it's one of the
actually had
things. Yeah.
Brewmaster had a trait in Legion where you spawned a heal orb. Like every time you hit 35% health, like you cross downward through 35%. So you could use that heal orb to get above 35% and then spawn another one as soon as you dropped again. So it was like really, really fun gameplay. Kind of broken, but it was awesome. That's why I like that threshold.
Yeah, I think 35 is a pretty balanced pick there. A pretty,
it's not a bad number.
It accomplishes most of what everybody wants out of that kind of effect. Let's move on though. We'll talk a little bit about 9.1, but first, let's do tip of the week. My tip of the week is if you are in Castle Nathria and you would like to use the Sludge Fist skip, but you would also like to kill some side bosses, make sure you use the Sludge Fist skip by talking to General Draven after you kill Shriekwing. Do it the first thing you do after you kill Shriekwing, because as soon as you activate the RP by doing the Huntsman trash and Draven moves up to start moving through that side of Castle Nathria, you can no longer use the skip. So if you wanted to say kill Shriekwing, Huntsman, Hungering Destroyer, Zymox for whatever reason, and then you wanted to go Sludge Fist in the last two, you can't do that unless you spawn Sludge Fist as the first thing you do after Shriekwing. So do that. That's that.
I mean, on top of that too, I heard that there's bugs with the skip right now, at least for European realms. I don't know what the deal is with it.
I haven't heard anything about that. All I've heard,
we did it last night and we didn't have problems with it. I've heard of 2 separate guilds getting stuck where Stone Legion generals and Sire Denathers won't spawn, but their skip is activated.
Okay, that's scary. That's very scary. Trell, what is your tip of the week?
So I was actually going to talk about the lanterns and Sanguine Depths, but Tettles said my tip word for word already on accident, which is fine.
Oh, did I?
So
unbelievable plagiarism here.
But I do have a tip for those that have little time, but they want to maximize their raid power for their raid groups on Tuesday. So if you're working all day and you got to get home an hour before your raid on Tuesday, you can actually save your 1000 anima quest from the previous week and just not turn it in. Get home, turn it in as soon as you get there to get your free renown, and then go do one calling for a guaranteed renown. I think it's guaranteed with the calling.
It's not. It's not
I think the world boss is either guaranteed or very high chance.
Dude, there's some there's some bullshit with the. There's actually some bullshit with the renown catch up. There's diminishing returns with how much you can get per week. I don't know what the deal is.
Yeah, but the first one you get each week is pretty easy.
Yeah, you can get 1 or 2. You can 100% get 1 or 2 every week. Whether or not you can get 7. It's at some point you get walled and you just stop getting it, but I don't know what causes that.
This tip is a good one, especially for next patch, depending on what the renown breakpoints are, right? Because it's really good if there is a new powerful breakpoint that you just hit, right? There's a new grow for your soul bind or a new 2% stamina buff. we actually just hit that in the last 2% stamina buff of this patch this week. So it's not going to be something that'll help you out the remainder of this patch, but it is absolutely that thought process of like saving up so that you can sprint to a level on a Tuesday is definitely going to be valuable depending on how they move that renown system going forward. So I think absolutely, saving up those quests can be a really good play.
Yeah, I swear I saw like the renown in the calling reward, like before I even did the calling, but either that or the world boss is almost guaranteed to get you like 3 renown levels right off the bat with doing souls, turning in the quest instantly, and then going and killing the world boss.
Tettles has a clip of the week for us, and this one is an artisan clip, a delightful classic from, in fact, this very channel, TTV Tettles. So you've got TTV Tettles, the elite druid of the Might Guild, hanging out in the High Mountain form, moving around using the High Mountain racial, tanking the boss in a creative location here, and discovering all too late a tragic event has occurred with the headbutt on this boss.
Tettles has fallen prey to the natural reaction of tanking where the camera is most least aids for the tank, but also the worst spot you could tank.
Let's get back in there with some sound, maybe. See if we can hear Tettles' response.
I'm so fucking dumb. I'm actually the dumbest.
All right, and let's hang on. We can set the speed actually on this to we can watch this in quarter time. So let's see if we can watch Tettles' facial reactions as this happens.
Why are you watching it in quarter?
Here it goes.
I'm so fucking dumb. Oh, dude, you know what the sad thing is? As soon as he starts queuing up headbutt, you can see me mashing my wild charge button like on my bar. I'm just like I'm like frantically hitting it because I realize what's happening. Like the millisecond he starts the channel, I was like, holy shit, I'm about to fucking get launched. I'm like, oh no, and then I'm like mashing it. It was just like not up. I was like, oh god.
Yeah, that's that's a rough one. Isn't this the same void that you've fallen off of in an earlier clip of the week as a Moonkin?
That was a beta.
Okay.
Shut up. That
Yes,
was a beta, and that was by the Juggernaut charge, not by the headbutt.
Okay. So we've nearly found all the different ways you can get knocked off that platform, but I'm sure we'll see more clips as the expansion goes on.
Tell me, oh, you should have cast Soul Shape. Oh, you should have cast Skull Bash. I'm just like, dude, I literally shouldn't have been there.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have been standing there.
Hey, Tettles, I think that was a misplay.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that one. Dude, I literally don't think I've been that embarrassed in a while. I was like, holy shit, I'm so dumb.
Yeah, I very much feel that. As a tank in particular, whenever you are tanking, it's like your mistakes just feel so much worse because it like wipes the raid or is very visible. Yeah. It's a lot less
feels bad.
Yeah, than his DPS. All right, let's move on to our second part of the main topic, which is discussion of 9.1. So 9.1, we don't have a release date for, notably, but we do know that we are going to get the next raid, Sanctum of Domination, or SOD is going to be the name, I guess, of it with the acronym. And it's a 10 boss raid, which I think is a pretty nice number. I like 10 boss raids. We've got the Terror Crew in it. We got the Eye of the Jailer. We got Kel'Thuzad. And we've got Sylvanas as the end boss there. It's not too much known about this, except for those things. We don't know any of the mechanics. We don't know any of the items or anything. We just know that's going to be the next raid.
Can you guys believe there's no footage of it at BlizzCon Line?
I was a little surprised by that. Yeah.
Like not even like a short little graphic of a boss just like floating in the air or something, like literally none.
Well,
of the new dungeon.
We got words of like some of the bosses that are in the raid, didn't we?
Yeah, we got Terror Crew, Eye of the Jailer, Fate of the Damned, Kel'Thuzad, and Sylvanas. So that's 5 of the 10 bosses. But yeah,
I'm down with the 10 boss raid too, though. Completely side tangent. I think that 10 bosses is like it feels pretty good.
We don't actually know all that much besides that about it, which I think that's part like that combined with the lack of a release date are the kind of worrying signs that maybe this patch is going to be later than we thought it would be.
Yeah.
For me, though, they missed out the biggest slide they could have had on Sanctum of Domination. This is all they would have needed, and really the fact that it's true, I'm still so excited for this raid, is just a slide that says, Stone Legion Generals not included. That's the biggest feature of Sanctum of Domination from my side.
What, you guys don't like bosses where you have to hold DPS like 6 times?
Oh my god, they got to stop that. They have to stop that, man. I think as literally as long as we've been doing this podcast, we talked about them having to stop this DPS boss bullshit. Because whenever we started this podcast, I remember what it was. It was Zakul. We complained about that for forever. And then it was like, oh god, was there other bosses that...
Was there anything in Nyalotha?
I don't think there was in Nyalotha, was there?
Carapace, you kind of stopped DPS.
Oh, yeah, kind of.
Not
only towards the end, though. It was only towards the end.
Like N'Zoth, you sometimes needed to stop for like 10 seconds before pushing in the intermission, but it wasn't a big deal. None of that was as offensive as Zakul or Stone Legion.
Stone Legion was, oh my god, Zakul, you were AFK all of phase 1. Stone Legion Generals, also AFK all of phase 1.
Oh, Mott and Pugs when you didn't have enough healing.
Mott. Yeah.
That's a good one.
True.
Mout.
So we also have the Q&A that they talked about. Of course, TBC Classic was announced at BlizzConline as well. We haven't talked about that yet, but
there was one good Q&A question about the faction imbalance that I think we can cover. And
the
rest of it was not
the
relevant.
Overwhelming majority is, lore stuff, but then there was this one and TBC Classic questions, which I understand. I mean, there's this kind of narrative of like, oh, why don't the Q&As talk about stuff that I wanted to hear about? But there's just so many different people that have so many different things they care about in the game.
There was a lot of bad Q&A questions. I would argue that like a bunch of the questions about like transmog and like all that stuff, I feel like I don't know,
man. Transmog people care about the game too. I think they should just maybe separate the Q&As a little bit. Maybe have like a lore Q&A or whatever, a cosmetics Q&A. And a systems Q&A, yeah,
that's what they should do.
I agree with that.
But those questions are there every year. I mean, it's just
it's just how it is,
by
right?
this point.
Do you plan to address the faction imbalance soon, though? And the TLDR of this is something we talk about a lot, especially at the high end of the Mythic Plus and raid scene, which is good because that is where it is at its worst.
Very bad, very bad.
Has been a growing issue, absolutely true. Even next tier there will be fewer alliance guilds than there were this tier, which is the fewest there have ever been in like the top 100. In fact, we could take a look at the Hall of Fame right now. If I can go.
Is Alliance Hall of Fame even going to fill up this tier?
So it didn't fill up in Crucible, but that was like a half tier. Every other tier it has for Alliance. Here's the Horde Hall of Fame. You can see 100 slots filled up. 22 days ago was the 100 spot filling up.
Yep.
Let's take a look at the Alliance Hall of Fame here. 61 guilds so far.
That's not that bad.
So it will fill probably in the next couple weeks. It always accelerates, right? Both factions, there's a lot more, like it accelerates. 1 to 50 takes a lot longer than 51 to 100 in the Hall of Fame, always. But when the Hall of Fame closed for Horde, there were 15 Alliance guilds on here, right? So it was 100 for Horde before there were 15 for Alliance.
Which is very bad.
And it's worse than it's ever been, yeah.
Yeah, that's really rough.
And notably, Alliance has Exorcist has swapped over to them, but a lot of other guilds have swapped to Horde from Alliance since either after Nyalotha or even there have been some this expansion. So, yeah, the question is, do they plan to address this anytime soon? And their answer is, yeah, it's a growing issue, which I think is a good identification. Originally, it was a couple racial issues in previous expansions, but right now the racials are balanced and arguably the Alliance are more powerful. Yes?
I would agree, yeah.
But the issue is the social dynamics, and we'll need a social solution. So this one worries me a little bit because, like, yes, the issue is that there's like inertia because the whole raid scene is Horde, makes it really hard to be Alliance and a Raider.
No. It makes it hard to be Alliance for literally any aspect of the game because the whole entire Horde, like, raid scene is Horde.
But the whole will need a social solution. I don't know, man. There's a lot of this feels like a way that they could justify not taking action, right? It's just like, oh, problems with the player base, so the player base can fix it or whatever. Well, but it is a top priority for us, so hopefully they are all actually thinking of, doing something on their end, because if they take no action, it will just continue to get worse.
I mean, dude, obviously there was also the meme during BlizzCon whenever Ian was asked about PI, he goes, it's a community problem.
Like, right, which I think THD had a tweet about it that was like, okay, well, the master looter problems were a community problem as well, but they had no problem, doing a systems change to address those.
Yeah, just I don't know. I don't think it's a real answer. Like if it's going to be a community fix, it's never going to happen because all alliance guilds will just eventually go horde, right? It's just headed that direction already.
Yeah, and they could fix it by like making the alliance racials more OP, but they've correctly identified here, and it's true, the alliance ones are mostly better. Like if we could start again and all be on the same faction, and we were just picking which faction based on the racials, I'm pretty sure we'd pick alliance.
We're never going to like. Here's the thing: even if they opened up like free faction transfers to alliance, basically, unless all of the raid scene was like, damn, let's go alliance. Nobody's going fucking alliance, man. Like like you're still just gonna sit on horde. Like even if it's free, like you want to play with your friends. And I mean, there's an ever increasing social dynamic of playing with players that aren't in your guild now too. Whether it's people that you meet through LFG, whether or not it's friends that you have in different guilds, whether or not it's your M+ push group, whether or not it's people that you, I don't know, used to be on the same server with forever ago, but then you faction transferred off. I mean, people want to play with people outside of their guild right now, and it's like even more so than ever before. But to play with them, they have to be on the same faction, and that's the only restriction right now. It's not realm restricted, it's not guild restricted. It's only faction restricted, and that's the only restriction currently.
Yeah, I mean, from my end, there's a lot of different ways that you can play WoW, right? And there's a lot of different WoWs that you can find when you start playing. And the difference between like if you start in a place where you're gonna run into people that are actually doing like M+ and have like, even, I'm not talking about like high-end raiding guilds, but just like guilds that raid together in a coordinated fashion, right? It doesn't even have to be mythic, just like a heroic raiding guild that has a schedule. If you're on a server that does that, if you're on a faction that does that, you have such a higher chance of getting exposed to that side of the game than, if you're a new player, when you first create your character, you get sent to these like new player servers that are just total bait, because you go on these servers, and I've done this rant on stream before, but you get on these servers and it's like there's 30 people on the server, there's 2 guilds, and like one of them is recruiting to hope to raid eventually, and once they get like 10 people, they're going to put out a poll to see when everybody can raid, and if there's a time that everybody can raid at the same time, then they'll try to raid, and you go in there one time, you kill 5 normal bosses, and you never raided them again, and it never comes together again.
It's a calendar invite.
Yeah, calendar.
True.
In-game calendar. Yeah, raid shows up on your in-game calendar. And so, like, just the difference in experience between if you're on a server like that versus if you're on a server where there's, like, multiple guilds that are like, hey, we're 6 out of 10 heroic, recruiting players, and there's, like, 30 different guilds that are like that have raid times. Like, the odds that you'll get into the raiding Mythic Plus scene is just so different, depending on which of those you end up in.
I mean, I know people who are, like, lifelong, people who, like, sit on Area 52, or lifelong people who sit on Illidan who don't, like, they jump from, like, they're Illidan and Area 52 locals, and they jump from guilds to guild on that realm itself. Like, they don't have to go anywhere else, right? And they're afforded that luxury because they're already on.
Yeah, because they're not on like Dune Mall or whatever.
Gore Grind or some shit.
Crush Ridge. So yeah, I don't know. It's I think that it's definitely like, it's something that from my end, that's such a strong part of the game that is such a shame that so many people just never get to see it. Other than that, yeah, mostly other stuff in the Q&A is not particularly relevant for this, so let's move on to some of the other interviews. Have had some interesting stuff that I think some tidbits that are revealing about their philosophy. One is their interview with Warcraft Radio, which there's a question here about class stacking and encounter design, when they asked if Morgan Day was surprised that some guilds used 4 unholy DKs, and the response was, "We always try to design our encounters so that certain classes have different strengths and weaknesses can really shine. We want to have that opportunity to feel like a hero on this fight or on the next fight. And when we're talking about people who are working at the top end, they'll find any little thing they can do to optimize the best they can." So when we see things like that, we're like, yeah, they're strong on this fight by a little bit, so of course we're going to see more of them. And we always try towards the back end of the raids to make sure that we're testing enough of those elements that you might try to stack early, but then maybe you're going to hit a road bump in the fight where you have to take a step back and look at what your composition is again and switch it around, and eventually turns into a much more balanced composition. I don't see how this happens in a world of anti-magic zone. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how different specs get the opportunity to feel like a hero when the question is any magic damage and the answer is anti-magic zone. But I'm not sure.
Well, they get to feel like the hero because they're brought based on their class buffs too, right? I mean, that is the function of class buffs. I mean, okay, so as
Does
much
that
as I
make you
shit
feel
on
like a
class buffs,
hero,
and I think
right?
I don't know,
Does it make you feel
you're
like a
in the
hero
raid.
to like increase everybody's magic damage by 5%? I feel like the stuff that makes you feel like a hero is like, okay, like I have Shadow Step and Cloak to soak this or whatever, right? And so like
Yeah.
the rogue gets to feel like a hero on a fight where there's immune soaks that you can cloak, right? Because I think you did, like if you were a rogue in Tomb of Sargeras, right? You did feel a bit like a hero the way that you were contributing on fights like Fallen Avatar and like Kill Jaden with the ability to soak stuff, or a rogue on Zool, you felt like a hero blasting huge damage into the boss, right? Like that's a niche fight. But I think that if you're just a class buff spec, like are you actually feeling like a hero when you're brought just for every fight because you increase everybody's number by a percent that's enough to make it so that you're always the right choice to bring? I don't know, man. I like obviously you do get brought and it feels good to get brought, but I don't know if you feel like a hero as a result of that. Maybe.
I don't know.
I think it's
for
just
me,
a different experience across the board. Like at the top end, it mostly boils down to like who does the most damage while being able to do the mechanics in any given way possible. But like I think in the middle range of raiders doing heroic progression, it probably looks pretty cool for like a rogue to cast Cloak of Shadows and clear a bunch of traps on Artificer, for example. You know,
Yeah.
whereas at the highest end, someone would be like, oh well, you just have DK cycle, AMS, and IBF, and they can do the same thing. But
I
it
think
is,
that
to
stuff
their
like
credit, it's there.
clearing on Zymox, like all the specs that can do that, I do think it feels good to be any of those specs. Like I think that is a hero moment.
I think for me, like the only thing that's important is that am I in on the boss or not? Like that's the most important metric for me.
True.
Like,
yeah, so because you're kind of detached from the whole hero.
I am very,
I don't think that's really
yeah.
aimed at you then.
I would agree.
That
It's
feeling.
I don't care about stacking as long as like there is a way to complete the boss without running some absolutely asinine comp. If 4 DKs is mandatory, then I'm mad. But like if it's like one, or if it's like Artificer where it's 2 DKs heavily encouraged, you can get away with like warriors and rogues and shit to be able to clear traps as well. All right, I can kind of be okay with
Yeah,
this.
my problem is when the best, when you're not really starting with a blank slate because of the strength of anti-magic zone and all the class buffs, right? You're not like looking at your 20 slots and like, oh cool, what cool stuff can we bring? It's like, okay, we've got our 20 slots. Well, we need warrior, monk, DH, priest, and we also need some DKs, and we gotta bring a paladin for a Diva Aura slot somewhere in there. So we've got all these classes we've got to fit into this comp somehow. And you're just you're like sitting on the bench there, and you're like an enhancement job, and you're like, okay, now they're gonna fill with the range specs that they want to stack in the range slots. And by the time they eventually, instead of there being like 20 slots that you can compete for, there's like 0 to 1 flex slots left at the end.
Okay.
Once all the stuff gets divvied up.
You know what's funny?
Yeah.
Okay, so we try to do the thing where we like field at least like what is an affordable comp for the boss. Like we prioritize like the lower bound first, and then we try to fill in like what we think is going to be like our guild's best. And like we were running like a Shadow Priest on Stone Legion Generals because like our Shadow Priest, nuts gamer, absolutely just insane player. He was in on Sardonathras. No, not many Shadow Priests kill Sardonathras, like mythic, like super top 100 level kind of shit. That guy was in on like 10 pulls of Stone Legion Generals, and it was like the worst. It was so fucking bad.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh no, you can't. I'm so sorry. You are one of our best players. This is not happening though, man. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean,
do you run that shit too, Dryness?
Oh yes,
holy shit, our
Shadow
comp is
Priest
bad.
absolutely unplayable on that fight for sure. Yeah, I don't know. It's tough. We had some similar stuff with like rogues on the bench where it's just like, I don't know how we're gonna bring you in, man. I can't do the math to figure it out. There's no way that the 20 slots get divided in such a way that there's like a spot. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's tough.
Well, it's also because 8 slots are literally taken up immediately. Like before you've pulled the boss, there are 8 slots that are taken up, and you only have 12 to pick from.
At least more if you factor in that like
minimum
you want those 4 hunters or whatever, right? You want those 3
literally
hunters.
8 minimum are taken
the
up.
8 are like non-negotiable.
It's like Warlock, Diva Aura, all the class buffs. Yeah, like that shit is literally taken up before the boss gets pulled.
All right, other stuff in 9-1. The thing about
Hold
Stygia.
on, pause. Do you think that matters? Okay, somebody says, but that doesn't matter for like World 1000. Do you think that class buffs
matter for World 1000 level guilds.
Yes.
It's just like
We can take a look at the like latest guilds to kill Sire and see which guilds
That's
were
not even
missing a
World 1000.
DH and which guilds were missing a monk or whatever. My suspicion is there will not be very many of them, and if they're missing one, they're not missing the others. But I could pull that up actually.
I mean, take a look at the most recent guilds that have killed like Sludgefist or something.
Okay, yeah, I guess I can just look at rank 1000 guilds, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can go find that. Hang on.
I feel like it matters just as much, but it's watered down just because by the time World 1000 guilds get to those bosses, things have been nerfed, classes have been buffed, you naturally
That's
gain
true.
power over time. So you have a little bit more leniency, but all those things are still just as important. They can still increase the power of your raid just as much.
Okay, I've pulled out 4 guilds here just from the bottom of the top 1000. We can take a look at their comps from Castle Nathria, most recent bosses. So here's World 996 Council of Blood. 3 tanks, including a Vengeance Demon Hunter and a Brewmaster Monk. We've got 1 DK. We've got our Mage for the int buff. We've got our Warlock for the thing. We've got a Warrior. So we've got some weird specs here, but you'll note
the druids.
There's a DH, there's a Monk, there's a DK, there's a Paladin for Devo, there's a Warrior for Battle Shout, there's a Priest for
There's a Warlock.
there's a Mage, and there are some specs that are less common for those classes, but there aren't the like less common specs of the classes that don't have those kind of buffs that they're bringing, right?
So that stuff is mandatory, but then that's where the anti-magic zone shit is flexible. That's where
okay, so then here's World 997. We've got 3 DKs, a Priest, a Mage, a Warrior, a Monk, a DH, a Priest.
They even have an enhancement shaman.
They do have an enhancement shaman in here. Yeah, this is a pretty melee heavy comp for sure. But it's still all those boxes are being checked, right? There's some there's some rogues making it in here as well, but still the heavy preponderances of the meta specs, right? It's like 75-25 meta specs versus off meta specs instead of 95-5 or whatever, but that's still a pretty hefty barrier to overcome, right?
Yeah. So I mean, yes, there are some. I think the class buffs are absolutely mandatory, and then you have strat specific stuff, which definitely comes more flexible over time.
Okay, here's like a bugged log that is like multiple instances of the same person, so that's that one's just bugged, I guess. Okay, then here's the next one. Our tanks are DH, Prot Warrior. So every single guild here, even these bottom of the top 1000 ones, have all had the Vengeance Demon Hunters. And
this guild is running
in here.
That guild's running the most meta ass comp I've ever seen.
I mean, this is still by far the most. And again, you see 1 Resto Druid, right? But what are the other healers? 2 Resto Shaman and a Disc Priest, right?
Yeah, that's a good comp.
You see 1 Subtlety Rogue. What are the other DPS, though? The Ret's a little off meta as well, but then Windwalker, Havoc's also a little off meta, I guess, but 2 Unholies, right? So like there are more slots for the off meta stuff, but the meta stuff still shows up, and there's still the lion's share of those slots. 10 or 15 of those slots are taken up by 5 specs or whatever, and then as the remaining 20, 30 specs in the game, you're fighting over just a few remaining slots. So
that's rough.
I do believe that the problem extends further down. It's just like, it's a case of like, you can't, there is an enhancement shaman in one of those guilds, but it's like, okay, there's 1 and there were 5 Unholies or 10 Unholies or whatever.
Dude, I actually gotta say, this is a tangent, but speaking of problems being passed down to like World 1000 guilds and all that, I pugged a Mythic Plus the other day, and Automatic Jack actually happened to be there. We both plugged into the same group.
Wow.
It was a 20 Theater of Pain, and the group wanted to invis pot all the prides.
I mean, 20 is pretty high though for like pugs, right?
20 Grievous, honestly,
that was like a cutting edge key for them.
Yeah,
but it's like, do we have to deal with this in a pug, man? Like, this is really hard to coordinate. That's actually a pretty hard thing to pull off.
Yeah, I mean, I my suspicion is that won't bleed down much lower than plus 20s, but it might.
Yeah, it was just funny. I was like, I can't believe this is happening.
I think the no voice groups, that strategy is literally just like straight off the table. No question about doing that once you're not in voice with people.
Well, so it was the first time they were trying it, right? And if you see it on stream, it looks easy. It's like watching an MDI poll where everything just dies in 10 seconds. You're like, oh, well, we can do that. And then you try it and you're like, wait, there's actually like 15 things going on.
I always think
spotting?
it's super easy. You just slam it.
And Bizpot strategy actually has a lot of things that can go wrong. Like if your tank is not a demon hunter, they could take damage or something and break the Bizpot, aka stagger.
Stagger isn't breaking this pot anymore. That they bug fixed that.
Really?
Yep. Trance told me.
I reported that so many times last expansion. I'm mad.
He's so sad.
Uh,
But yeah, dude, we've had people walk through fucking Sanguine and shit. It breaks out the Bizpot, and then you have the Pride starting at 4 stacks, and then you're like,
yeah, it's so bad.
this
Dude,
is,
it's
this
so
is where we
bad.
wipe.
Yeah.
It definitely is a thing where it's like if you fuck it up, your Pride starts at 4 stacks, and you're like almost immediately wiping.
All right, our final piece of news on 9.1 is, just as we mentioned at the start of the show, Stygia, basically irrelevant. You can spend all your Stygia now. You won't need it. Next, there will be a new currency next patch for whatever the Stygia equivalent stuff is, which they haven't announced that there will be sockets or whatever, conduit upgrades from the mob, but there's a good chance. But it won't be Stygia. It'll be some other currency. Also, all mounts will work in the mod 9.1, so if you haven't done Twisting Corridors yet, you don't feel like you have to, because you just can have any mount do it in 9.1. Although that is a ways away, so if you're close, finish your Twisting Corridors, get your Corridor Creeper. Let's move on to, we've got a little bit of Q&A, but first we get to thank our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/Titanforge, who wants us to remind everybody, or let you all know, perhaps, that there's an event called Mimosas and M Plus Volume 2 happening in our Discord, in the Titanforge Podcast Discord, this Saturday at 9 a.m. Pacific. So that is February 27th.
That's when we're doing the MDI.
Yeah.
So
we will not be present at this, but patrons are setting this up, and the name is Mimosas and M Plus, so you can infer for yourself what sort of events will be occurring. It's in the Titanforge Podcast Discord, which if you're watching this on YouTube or listening to this in on a podcast app, there will be a link in the description to that Discord if you want to come join, hang out. And yeah, it'll be happening there.
I mean, yeah, Trell and I normally do it. I went like 2 weeks ago whenever they had it last time, but can't.
Yeah, 9 a.m. Pacific. That's well within my bedtime range, so I haven't made it to one yet. But maybe if my sleep schedule either becomes much more normie or super degen, and I'm back around so that I'm still awake at that time, which it's done both of those at various times in the past. I'll be there for some of them.
Are you gonna be there this weekend, Trell? Are you doing it this weekend?
I'll be there. I'll be hanging out. We usually do like 15 to 18 keys depending on who we have, and if anyone's like a Patreon or just wants to hang out, like feel free to hop in, and it's a good time.
Yeah, no Patreon requirements for that, although it is, of course, organized by our incredible patrons, some of whom include Paul of US Proudmore, Sports Bra, Hot Venthier GF of US Tichondrius, Riley, welcome back, dude, glad you're doing well, Gopher, Valor Points, Huge Pog, King of Skills, Zuko, Ja, Irish Ratness' Dino Pillow, Chromed, Chromed Trekkie. Dude, that's literally, I keep saying Seraphicus there because Seraphicus has been in that spot for so long, but now I'm so sad. Hole in my heart. Trekkie, the Marshare, Regulus, Nevernude, Chewy, BlizzCon Line, aka Bizarre Leading Into, Zealous Zombies, Chasing Over Nova, Lilith, Illidan, and Night Elves. A little bit of a stretch there, but
he actually named major characters from most of the Blizzard games. That's impressive.
I think that's an impressive acronym. I wish I was good at acronyms. ZivXX, Salty Senny, Necris, Rebdil, Nevuk, Sinmora, Eevee. Oh god, please buff Frosty K and PvE.
The new meta was
Dude, Eevee had been Frosty K new meta for so long. So sad. Stevenson, an unnamed benefactor. Take Light of the Protector and Frenzied Regen off the GCD. Woe Bonesy No Verse. No Trick. I Scheduled a Tettle's Flame. Sire Dematicus. Mir. Dymat. Syncope. Gamer Dad. 47 Convoke. Oh, wait. Congratulations. Yeah. Did Gamer Dad in training graduated to Gamer Dad? Congratulations on that. 47 Convoke Me Daddy. Maybe I'm a Valheim main now. Handy is going to pump in Shadowlands. Today with Nyx, learn the secret trick to getting tank trinkets. Tanks hate her because the trick is not tanking. Flick?
True.
Hey Tettles, can I just be Van Halen this week? Gallic, Brusif, Chewy, Dratnosaurus Abyss. The Tettles effect is just Murphy's Law on steroids. True. Dabrowski, M Sanity, Canyon and Moon Sonara of Emerald Dream Division 7 and Area 52 Scraw, Xena, Shadow Catra is the worst warlock on Zul'jin US, and Red Color. Thanks all for the support. Again, Tettles is the person in charge of names if yours is not on there and should be, or should be or you want to change it to something else, reach out to him. Let's move on to Q&A. First Q&A question comes from Riley in Discord, who asks, if we have some downtime, should we be swapping to all 4 covenants to get them caught up in preparation for the inevitable buffs and nerfs? This is a really interesting question because I think that there is incentive to do this, right? So on the one hand, if you swap, once you have been a covenant, swapping back to it takes 7 days. It's not just a weekly reset now, it's 7 full days between when you can start and finish the quest chain to rejoin a covenant you've already been. So the amount of time to get back to a covenant you have already been is set fixed at 7 days. If you're swapping to a covenant you've never been, it's instant, but you're at 0 renown, right? And so rather than being a flat 7 days to make that swap, it scales with how long it takes you to get all the renown you need, which my suspicion is that at 40 renown, it will take longer than 7 days to be fully caught up. So there is incentive to like swap to all 4 covenants and build up to 40 renown on all 4 of them. But A of all, that sounds awful. B of all, there's a good chance that they will speed up that 1 to 40 renown range even further as we go along in the expansion. And there's a good chance that you'll still be tagged as having been that covenant once. So my feeling is, looking at it, that I probably am not going to pull the trigger on getting all 4 covenants to renown 40 as of right now, but I still haven't made that decision 100% for sure. There is incentive to do it, but it's not a clear choice.
I mean, dude, Ian has also alluded to the fact that there may be something coming down the pipe later where they completely reset and like accident forgiveness for you swapping your covenants.
Yeah,
right?
so if they reset that, then it would be good to be renown 40 on all 4, right? If they reset that whole "you've been this covenant before" penalty. So
I hope they do that every tier. Please do that.
Yeah, that would create an incentive to that. I mean, that would make it clearly the right choice to level all 4 of them to renown 40, though, which missed me with that. Does not sound particularly fun. But yeah, so should you do it? I can't answer it with certainty, but it's something to think about if you're, a degenerate. Never Nude in Discord asks, this is an idea for you guys to talk about, having non-healer raid CDs, so this is Darkness, AMZ, work more like Battle Res. So you start with one use and it recharges, and it's like shared across all players of that spec. And this would prevent stacking of a certain class for the raid CD, and then maybe it also has a 20-second ICD or something, so you can't just save up 3 and stack them all at once from just one DK or DH in your raid.
I mean, here's my thought process on that: is like, if it's good, then it's going to be so good that it's mandatory, or it's just going to be like.
Well, so the thing is though that it would be like 1 DK brings as much value as 4 DKs, right? Instead of 4 DKs being better than 1 DK, right?
Yeah.
I don't really like. I feel like the battle res timer is like already a pretty awkward fix, and I don't like propagating that further. And I also don't like when the first copy of a certain spec is extremely valuable relative to the second copy, because I feel like it just makes this weird thing where it's like, you're looking for exactly 1 monk on your roster or whatever. You're looking for exactly 1 DH. And I don't want to extend that further. I would rather walk in the opposite direction of that, where like the second DH is okay, like maybe it's less valuable, but it's diminishing returns rather than returns that fall off a cliff. But I do think some way of addressing AMZ, and maybe to a lesser extent Darkness, would be good. I don't know. I feel like AMZ just needs a nerf. Needs a 75% nerf, man. Just hit that thing from orbit with the.
I don't know about 75% nerf, but it just seems to. I mean, Rally is also just fucking absurd. Rally is like 33% health.
Rally is
2 minutes.
Yeah.
Rally is 33% health on like a 2-minute CD whenever you're running the endurance conduit. That is an absurdly broken ability as well. Good. It's just that Warrior doesn't do good damage, so it's like, AMZ's in the line of sight. It's like, Rally is really stupid.
Like, Limit brought 2 Warriors though for Sire, and they talked about how maybe they would change the DPS Warrior into like a Windwalker, a second Windwalker. But I think that there's a strong argument that actually that Rally was key. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's tough, a tough problem to solve. There's definitely downsides with the current system, but also downsides with this fix. I do think it's a creative way to think about it, though. something that may be worth exploring. And our final Q&A question is from Cardinark, who asks, or not our final Q&A question, there's just been another one added in, but our penultimate Q&A question as of right now, unless Tettles pays some more in, is from Cardinark, who asks, how is Trell feeling? Is the recovery going well?
Oh, I'm okay. Aside from the ice storm last week, I'm actually not doing too bad. I just have some nasty scars at this point.
Isn't it good as well? Because aren't you supposed to put like ice on inflamed areas? So isn't it nature delivering to you the ice that you need for recovery?
Yeah, no water and the likely chance of no power was definitely what I wanted right now after surgery.
That's what they say. Stressful circumstances are good for your health. That's all the science I've seen. Very indicative. All right, final question comes from the Sean Gill, who asks, is there a particular tank you wish was meta in M+? Blood DK for me, I think, is the one that I've had the most fun on. Blood DK obviously has been meta before, but I love Blood DK. It's so fun.
Brewmaster.
When a Brewmaster's been good, it's always been really fun as well. That's true. Legion Brew.
This is a weird take, but I actually really like Vengeance Demon meta.
I think that's fair as well. I liked Legion Vengeance really a lot as well. I feel like that was really fun.
I like this Vengeance meta that we're in, at least in terms of how to play around the tank. I think I think tanks have to kite right now, but how you have to play around Vengeance's strengths feels, I don't know, at least semi-rewarding. Whereas, I don't know, you had shit in the past like Prot Warrior where just they feel like their weaknesses were so defined.
Well, because Prot Warrior was basically just like, I do the most damage, but like I don't do any of the other stuff.
Everybody else
you guys
do
have to do
everything
that
else
for me. Yeah, which is a reversal of roles from the tank and DPS spots.
I'd rather okay. So as a ranged DPS or a balanced player, I would rather support the tank as opposed to have to fucking do the tank's jobs for it.
Yeah, which was the Prot Warrior vibe for sure. I don't know. I think it's I'm less concerned with which tank is the best, and I'm more concerned that like all tanks are able to have a good time.
I agree with that.
Same.
But yeah, I think if I had to pick a tank spec to be on top, I think Vengeance, Brew, Blood would all be among my picks.
Yeah, tanks with good control, basically, and we like tanks with good control.
Honestly,
things.
Anything except for Warrior, man. Paladin, Bear, cool too. Heck, Warriors though.
Paladin and Bear actually do have their own like strengths that are pretty cool. Like Bear is pretty one-dimensional from time to time, but like at least they do a lot of cool things.
Yeah,
same with Paladin.
I think Bear is in a pretty good spot right now, where like at least when you're doing a key with a bear, you're kind of aware of the strengths of what the bear can do, right? And like you can see when they're like incarn thrashing and like immune to damage, and you're like, wow, the bear is doing something cool here. Whereas there are a lot of tanks that you can play with right now where you're never aware of the cool things that they're doing. You're just aware of like, here's one way that is horrible that this spec is not a Vengeance Demon Hunter, right? And like we have to fix this. So any tank meta where every spec you're feeling its strengths rather than just weaknesses is one that I'm about. All right, that about does it for our show this week. We will return next week at our time of 3:30 Pacific on Wednesday is the current plan. We'll let you know on Twitter and stuff if plans change, as they sometimes do. We are this weekend, of course, MDI, Tettles and myself on the Warcraft YouTube, and the Mimosas and M Plus thing in Titanforge Podcast Discord on Saturday, 9 a.m. Pacific. Those are the next events to be looking forward to on our end. That's the end of our show, though. Bye, everybody.
Bye.